So for today, it's kind of like Jeopardy. You know, on Jeopardy, you have to, they give you the answer and you have to give them the question. What if the answer that I give you is, there's a graph. What was the question? Yes?
What is the graph of sine x?
Very good. You even formed it in the stated it in the form of a question. Sine. He knew that was sine. And of course, there won't be any that are that easy, but we're going to give you a graph and you're going to have to go, okay, what if I change this to a 4 and a negative 4? And I know that's pretty easy change. You now know it's not just sine, it's been stretched. But then, what if I change this and I don't label it with the normal stuff, which would normally be 2 pi? What if instead it's 2 pi over 3 right there? Now what's the question? Like, what's the equation? All right, I don't think it's that hard, but it's definitely harder than it was in the first place. There's a couple more numbers in it. Compare with the kid next to you and see if you've got this already. Maybe you know one of the numbers but not the other. Just talk to him about it. I'll pause while you give that a shot. All right, if I challenged you with, what's the name of that 4? Do you happen to know? Very good, it's the amplitude. And you put in a 3 theta. Now, I know that you are right, but if you had to describe how you knew that, how did you know to put that? Was it just kind of like an instinct because you saw that this was divided by 3, or what? Ah, the 3 is where the b would be. All right, so I'm going to remind you, on the harder ones, that's the trick, is like, how do you turn that into just knowing it's a 3? So I'm going to remind you of the formula for that. Please write it, everybody. Period is 2 pi over b. We will not tell you b. We won't tell you b. So then you must know the period. Because, like, to figure out what b is, you'll need to know the period. So if you look at mine, can you tell that the period is 2 pi over 3? So do you get, if I write 2 pi over 3 here, it becomes obvious that b must be 3. Get what I mean? Like, if 2 pi divided by 3 is 2 pi over b, b must be 3. Okay, here's another one that's like that, though. Everybody, don't even draw this. This would be the question. It will be drawn already. So my question is, this one is not sine because it goes down right away. And it's only halfway done, but yet they stop right there. And they say, what graph is it? Well, I know which one it is. But then they put a 3 here and a negative 3 down here. And they tell me that this spot right here is pi. Trickier because I didn't give you the whole equation. I didn't tell you what function it was. You have to figure out what function is it. And I didn't tell you the period of it, but you can assume that this graph would have to continue, right? All right, try to figure out what this equation is. I'll pause for a second. Step 1 is figure out, is it sine or cosine? Step 2, figure out, is there an amplitude change? Step 3, figure out if the period is normal and is the period just 2 pi. If the period isn't 2 pi, then you go, period is 2 pi over b, and you try to figure out from me telling you the period what b must be. Okay, by now did you figure out this one was cosine? Raise your hand if you knew it was cosine at least. Okay, good. So then, and also that there's a 3 here, so the amplitude's 3. This got to be 3 cosine. But obviously there's a chance that there's a stretch right there. So this last part, is this normal for where cosine should be? If I like extend cosine out, if you get cosine would look like that. Cosine starts at a peak and ends at a peak, so it's a big valley. What would be here? Well, if this is pi, this would be 2 pi. Do you get it is normal cosine? So therefore, this was just a 1, or you didn't have to say anything. It would just be 3 cosine of theta. All right. Why was that weird? Because I only give you part of the cosine graph. All right. Now, it gets even harder. I only gave you part of the graph. And I'm going to tell you that right there is 4 pi. Whoa. Is that a complete cycle? No. Figure out what the period is, like the x at the end once you do complete a complete cycle. You can extend it yourself. And then if I tell you that this is 2, and this goes down to -2, that's its range, -2 to 2, you should be able to tell me the equation for this. I'll pause for a second. I'll give this a try. Let's see if you realize this thing was sine because it starts at 0, 0, and it goes up. Then, if it's sine, I then just have to figure out what number goes here and what number goes here, usually. I mean, we could have shifted it up, in which case there'd be a number here, too. We didn't shift it up, though, because you can tell it goes to 2 and -2. So that tells you that this is a 2, and so far it's pretty easy. But then this part. I can put a b there for a placeholder, but we don't know b. Period is 2 pi over b, so I must have somehow told you the period. If halfway through you're at 4 pi, do you get the period would be 8 pi? Think about that. If it's halfway done with itself at 4 pi, if I extended this out, do you get that it would have been 8 pi here? And therefore the period is 8 pi. So then I can solve for b. I times by b on both sides. And then I divide both sides by 8 pi. b equals 2 pi over 8 pi. And that means b is simplified 2/8. b is 1/4. Who had a 1/4 in there? Only like 3 kids would have had this right. Do you get what I just did? I figured out that if I was halfway done by 4 pi, I'd be fully done by 8 pi. That means the period's 8 pi. And that means I put an 8 pi here and I just have to solve. All right, let's do another one like that. I'm halfway done with, well, one of the functions. And I'm at 5 pi. This is an 8, and this goes down to -8. What's the equation for this one? Okay, so it's a tricky one. I only give you half the graph, but you have to be able to extend this in your head and say, what would it have ended at? And it would have ended at 10 pi, and therefore its period is 10 pi. And then you write that little formula. Period is 2 pi over b. You don't know b, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this at all. We had already put the b in. 8 cosine of, what goes here? b. So I know the period is 10 pi, and then you can solve from right here. If you didn't get this far, you should try this with me. You'd go 10 pi equals 2 pi over b. You times by b on both sides. And you have b times 10 pi equals 2 pi. These get confusing because it seems like there's 2 variables, but pi is just a number. Divide both sides by 10 pi, and those are gone. And it's 2 pi over 10 pi. Pi's canceled. 2/10 is 1/5. 1/5. Who got the 1/5 right this time? All right, I'm up to most of the class. Any questions about how I got that? I extended the graph out, figured out what the period would be, and put it there. All right. Now this one's going to be weird because at first you're going to think it isn't any one of the functions that I know. But if you just think about it a little longer than normal, this one isn't that hard. Who knows the secret? Once you know it, you know it. Yes.
Isn't it a vertical flip?
It's been flipped. So the first thing I would do if I were stuck and I was like, I can't tell what this is. Try flipping it. Do you get when I flip it? It looks like that. And then you go, oh, it's that other function. It's just been flipped. How many of you had caught that? Raise your hand if you had caught that. All right, like 6 of you. That's good. Okay. So now, finish this one off. One of the toughest ones I've done so far because it had a flip and there's a amplitude change and there's a B that's different than normal. Every time I'd be writing period is 2 pi over B, and then I'll tell you the period somehow, and you solve for B. Okay, please talk to the kid next to you when you're done. Okay, let's see. Dice of Destiny. Who should I call upon today to explain this? First, you're going to explain which function was it. Then you can tell me like the amplitude stuff. All right. Can't find my dice, so it's going to be a 1 and a 4. And see what happens. Okay, and that is Ava. Can you tell me what the function was? Was it sine, cosine? Sine. It just had been flipped, so negative. And then the rest of the amplitude. All right, so let's try to figure out, I'm not saying you're wrong on the 1/4. I'm just asking, how do you figure out this B term here? Its period is 2 pi over B, so what did you do? You just kind of knew. Let's talk it through. Didn't I tell you the period by how I drew it? What was the period of this one? So 4 pi. And then I can solve this by multiplying both sides to clear the fraction. Multiply by what?
Multiply by B.
That's a B. Good. And now it's B times 4 pi equals 2 pi. Now what? Divide by 4 pi. Cancels. That simplifies down to what? You just really wanted the answer to be 1/4.
Yeah, or
What does it actually simplify to? 1/2. So the answer for B is 1/2. Who had 1/2? Excellent. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, I don't like that way. Well, that way worked. I got the right answer out of it. So that's the way that I would do it. Okay. Now, I'm going to go do some review. That is it. If you understood everything I just did right there, you got today's figured out. And then that's the last thing. And then now it's just the test. So I have time right now to review with you for a bit for the test, which is not tomorrow, but the next day. Tomorrow we have a complete review that goes beginning to end. All right, so the thing I think you guys will be the worst at is cotangent. So before I even do cotangent, I'm going to do a tangent one because it's easier. And then hopefully you'll remember that cotangent is just shifted over from tangent. So let's try a tangent one. What if I said 4 tangent? Just that. Can you graph 4 tangent? So the first thing I would do is try to remember what tangent looks like. Kind of like x to the 3rd graph, except it's got asymptotes on it. Remember to always label the y-axis because it always goes through 1 and -1 to start with. And then you can always stretch it. And on tangent's case, you just need to label the asymptotes. All right, just compare the general shape of the graph with the kid next to you and see if you're on the right track. I know it looks like that for tangent, but I'd need asymptote labels. Do you know those?
Is it negative pi over 2 and pi over 2?
It is. This one's pi over 2. This one's negative pi over 2. And then what?
The y is 4 and -4.
normally 1 and negative 1, so I changed it to 4 and negative 4. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Cool. All right, now that's tangent. Now you have a hope of being able to do cotangent. Remember, cotangent, it's like this thing is flipped, but also like it got shifted over to the right. So this is what cotangent looks like. Everybody try to graph cotangent of 4 theta. First thing you do, one step at a time. Just figure out what cotangent looks like. Then try to figure out how to renumber it. And don't trust that 4, which seems like you times it by 4. You don't. Because it's on the inside. Always label your y-axis and your x-axis. In the case of tangent and cotangent, you only have to label the asymptotes. Okay, here we go. So cotangent is shifted over. Did you remember that it was shifted over here and that cotangent goes down the whole time where the other one goes up the whole time? As you read from left to right, that's always going down. And then, if you remember that tangent and cotangent have a period of pi, hopefully you'd have known that that was pi. I know you might think it was pi over 2 because that's where the asymptote was last time, but last time the asymptote was here. And if you think about it, this thing gets over with between that, which is 0, and that. And if we know that the period is pi, you should know that that's pi. So 0 to pi. And there it is. But there's a 4 here. So that changes it. So do I just trust the 4 and multiply by 4? No, I divide by 4, and there's my answer, pi over 4. Raise your hand if you figured out that was pi over 4. A lot of them did. Okay. And then, another one that I think is going to be difficult for you is secant. Graph 2 secant of 3 theta. That is hard enough that it would be one of the R3s. Because you don't even start by graphing secant, you start by graphing what? Cosine. And then secant rides on its back, and then there's asymptotes wherever cosine hits 0. So yeah, this one's complicated. Don't forget to label both the y-axis and the x-axis. I'll pause while you give this one a shot. This is truly hard. So you start this by graphing secant and cosine go together, right? So I start with cosine. Cosine quickly goes right to the bottom. Then it comes back up and stops right there. And that's 1 and that's negative 1 on the normal graph. And this is, always just start with those. 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and there's cosine. Okay, hard work, but I've just started. Now secant has a 1 over relationship with cosine, so wherever cosine is 0, it's 1 over 0. That's why the asymptotes are there. Next, I always make it right on the back of the sister function, and in the past, we would have made you only do that much. And I know that feels weird because these are only half loops. But on this test, we decided to say you can graph at least 1 period of secant. So then if you've completed your loop, you're okay. But do you get that's more than 1 period of it? Because it's got 2 upward loops and only 1 downward one. And so that actually is more than 1 period. But it's okay. We're going to allow you to do that on the test. But I haven't dealt with the 2 yet. Well, that's easy. It just changes this to a 2 and this to a negative 2. And I haven't dealt with this 3 yet. Well, I can't times everything by 3 because you can't trust the inside. So you go with 1/3. But I think it's smart to start here. And then you go pi over 6. And then you can just count up. 2 pi over 6. 3 pi over 6. And 4 pi over 6. And yes, they reduce, but I think it's smarter to just see the flow. 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6. Would I have accepted it if you said pi over 3? Sure, it's the same thing, it's just reduced. And that would be 2 pi over 3 if you reduce it. And that would be pi over 2 if you reduce it. But look at how that does not flow. Pi over 6, pi over 3, pi over 2, 2 pi over 3. That doesn't flow at all. So I think these are the way I would go. Yes?
How come the graph doesn't like flip?
Because there was no negative. Did you think there was a negative? That's just my equal sign
No,
there.
I just thought when it's like the sister flips.
Nope, the graph does not flip. It's 1 over that graph, which means my original graph is this blue one. I really should erase that. Like, that's just there to help me figure out where to put secant. But secant is that. And so you're right, there's a 1 over relationship. But the way you got to think of it is that it's so different. It is completely flipped over. And this, if you just take a random spot on cosine and you go, well, here's a random spot on cosine where it's at about a half. Well, in this, no, that's half of 2, which would be about 1. Then you got to flip that over and make it the reciprocal of that. So it changes. All right. So, I'm not explaining this very well, but bottom line, it is a 1 over function, and yet it looks like that when it's done. And don't forget the green loop at the bottom down here. All right. Any questions about that secant graph? One more review for our, actually, I'm trying to read the crowd. I think we should probably get into the homework or I'm going to lose you. So, everybody get to the homework for today. The very first question, there's normally I cut it down, right? So I'm only having you do problems 1 through 6 today. And I'm just being real here. Last night I spent 4 hours grading homework. Oh my gosh, is that incredibly boring. It's awful. And so I'm going to try to do more where I have a Schoology quiz for your class. So I almost never have Schoology quizzes, and so what I'm doing is I'm just taking the worksheet, the normal worksheet that you have, and I'm asking you to type your answers into Schoology. And because these are weird to type, I made them mostly multiple choice. Okay? So you look at the worksheet to get the question, and then you figure out what you think the answer would be. Go to the Schoology quiz, find it in the multiple choice. Okay? All right, so let's look at number 1. It's a PDF. And if I were to replicate it, would you agree that it's a lot more than 1 period of it? Then just zoom in your head. Would you agree it looks like cosine? If I just zoom in on this part, would you agree that that's a cosine graph for number 1? Well, then right away I know it's y equals cosine. But, of course, it's not likely to be that simple. This one has a 2 up here. Then that means it peaks out at 1, which isn't that the normal thing cosine peaks at? So then the amplitude is still 1. But my question is, when does it end? Well, we go between 0 and here. Don't try to look at the whole thing. I mean, it keeps going. It does like a whole bunch of cycles, but just look in here. Bodie, can you tell me where does it end? Right there, at the peak. Look on the graph. What's underneath that spot? What's right here? So, do you get, if you found 0, 0 right here, then you go over, and then it's where it peaked. Does it say pi? Can you guys verify that that says pi right there? Okay, good. Then would you agree that normally should be 2 pi? You know what I mean? Like this is not normal. Normal would be 2 pi right there. So it's got to change right there. There is some b term. So I'm going to write a little b for now. And then we go to that formula. Because this is not 2 pi, I got to figure out what the b term is. I go back to period is 2 pi over b. And did I tell you b? No. So I must have told you the period. So what's the period? Right there. That's how long a period is. It started, it ended, it started on top, it ended on top. That's the period. So what is the period? Say it. Pi. The period is pi. Now you can solve for b. Times both sides by b to clear the fraction. B pi, 2 pi. B's a load. 2 pi over pi. Wait a minute. What's it really then? What's b? You guys have gotten worse at participating. It's not that hard. What's b? 2, yes. B is 2, see? So b is 2, so then this must be a 2. Now, we figured out the first answer. Cosine of 2 theta. Nope, it's not. Because look, it's 2 up here, but where does it actually peak out? It actually peaks out at 1. But good guess. I mean, a lot of kids said that last hour. They thought there was a 2 in front. There is not a 2 in front. Now you go to your multiple choice answers, and this is one of them. And you're done with number 1. Let's do number 2 together. I will replicate the important part of number 2. On number 2, I think the part that's important is this part. Because I just focus on that and I go, oh, sine starts like that. Know what I mean? Now, how high does it go? Sabins, how high does it go? Okay, and then can we assume that would go down -1? Yes, we can. So then this is normal amplitude. So, Maren, what's that?
There is 2 pi.
2 pi. Then tell me this. When this thing completes a complete cycle, what would be here?
4 pi.
So the period is 4 pi. I had to make this part. But you can see how that would work, couldn't you? Could you extend that? It's not that bad. And then you go, all right, it was sine. It was not stretched vertically, so I leave it as a normal 1 in the front. And then this is not the normal b. It's not just a 1. I can do that little period equals 2 pi over b. And I must have told you the period, which I did. And then you solve and you figure out what b must be. Then you put it in on Schoology quiz and what you think the answer is. Sometimes I make them multiple choice, sometimes I make them true false. But to keep you from having trouble, like how do I type this in? I made it, basically mostly multiple choice. And you will see the answers. Now, some of you are like, I like to see the key. You will. At the end of your first try, the key comes up and tells you what the answers were. If you want, you can take 2 tries, you get the average of the scores. All right. That's all I got for you for today.